colleagues on the line, and we welcome everyone to this very, very essential topic, building customer and staff loyalty through inclusivity. What are we missing? So we want to all create a connected, positive and livable community. And it is our very, very special privilege to be joined today by Dr. Ben Gauntlett, who is the Disability Discrimination Commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission. Dr. Ben commenced his 5-year term as the Disability Discrimination Commissioner in 2019. And prior to commencing this role, Ben worked as a barrister in Western Australia and Victoria with a broad-ranging practice. He has worked as an associate at the High Court of Australia, as counsel assisting the Solicitor General of the Commonwealth, as well as a solicitor for a large commercial law firm, as well as teaching law in Australia and the UK. He also studied at the University of Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. As Disability Discrimination Commissioner, Ben advocates to remove barriers to people with disability participating in society and to ensure the human rights of people with disability are respected. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Ben. I'll just call you Ben. I believe you're going to start with a presentation, so I'll just clear my screen and hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me, Amanda, and thank you, Leanne. It's great to be with the Better Business Partnership today, and I'd like to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm presenting to you from in the centre of Sydney, being Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I'll pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the audience today. What I'm going to do is just to present to you for about 15 minutes in relation to the issue of how to build customer and staff loyalty through inclusivity. In doing so, I'm going to really try and highlight, I guess, initially the widespread nature of disability and give you some of the policy framework that exists in relation to disability in Australia, but also hopefully make you think about what are some of the critical concerns for your business to try and attract people with disabilities, not only as employees, but also as customers. So I'll just share my screen. Can everybody see that? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. So in terms of what I'm going to do today, I'm going to start by giving you some statistics on disability in Australia to inform the discussion of what is disability in Australia, but also the widespread nature of disability. People often think it's a narrow issue. It's very much not. It's a large customer employee base for you to consider. I'm going to then talk about some key points for you to take on board. I'm going to outline the Australian Human Rights Commission's Inclusivity project, which is an employment program that has 2 pilot programs that will run relating to it concerning people with disability, but also has a lot of free resources on its website to employ more people with disability, but also for people with disability themselves seeking employment. I'm going to be open about what are some of the ongoing issues in disability employment in Australia, and then inform you as to the policy framework that exists for people with disability in Australia more generally, in a way to give you an understanding of what are some of the structural issues that people with disability need to consider or potentially overcome to go about living their lives in a way that's equal to others. Now, we often like to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. People with disability are referred to throughout the Sustainable Development Goals as a critical issue. But it's often an area where businesses forget to refer to people with disability. So to give you an idea as to sort of the lack of awareness of disability in the community, less than 20% of the ASX top 50 have a disability action plan filed with the Australian Human Rights Commission. And what that means is that when we discuss diversity and inclusion, disability is often left out. And finally, what I want to do is to just highlight some issues that you may go away and consider for both customer inclusivity and staff inclusivity. And not surprisingly, a lot of them are exactly the same. So when we talk about disability in Australia, just under 20% of Australians live with disability at any one time. Over 80% of disability, though, is invisible in nature, and over 80% of disability is acquired during the totality of someone's life. By that, what I mean is that disability is directly correlated with age, and one of the common misconceptions is that when a person gets to the age of 65, they suddenly stop having disability and they're actually a person who's deemed sort of an older citizen. That's absolutely incorrect. Disability and age age is irrelevant to the assessment of disability. So when a person is in an aged care home, they may also have a disability. It's just a service system in which government classifies people. What we do know, though, is that for a person born in 2018, they can expect to spend approximately 1/5 of their life living with a disability. Now, you've all probably heard of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which is a wonderful social reform that exists in Australia to assist people with disability. It was only ever intended to cover approximately 10 to 15% of the population living with disability. And it deals with the most serious and profound forms of disability. I'm on the National Disability Insurance Scheme. I'm a quadriplegic from a rugby accident when I was age 16. And what I think everyone needs to appreciate is that a person can have a disability and not be on the National Disability Insurance Scheme. But approximately 1/5 of the population lives with disability, but they also have friends and family who live with them and are affected by it. And 2.65 million Australians have caring responsibilities for a person living with disability. Now, if you look at sort of underlying health conditions, and not every underlying health condition is a disability, it's estimated that 47.3% of Australians are living with an underlying health condition at any one time. So when we talk about disability, it's not a narrow issue, it's not a small issue, it's a large part of the population. And it's important that as organisations, that as businesses, that as citizens, that as individuals, we really take the time to become comfortable with having the discussion about disability in the community. So I want to give you 3 key points to perhaps take away from today's presentation. The first is that disability is deeply personal. When you ask a customer or a staff member about disability, or you're going to ask about it, please understand that trust takes time to build. Create a safe space to enable the conversation to occur. But if you use impertinent language, if you want to joke about the issue, if you make a person feel uncomfortable, it can be also lost in an instant. So try and understand the importance of being respectful in your conversations and interactions concerning people with disability. And what I always try and say to people is, before you ask the question about disability or anything like that, what you might consider is, do I know 4 key facts about this person that mean that I know them that little bit better so that they trust me? It might be where they last went on holiday, what their favourite food is, what their favourite movie is, how many siblings they have. But create that rapport and trust before you have a conversation relating to disability, because it'll make the conversation go much smoother. And it's important to be lighthearted, it's important to be friendly, it's important to be able to say sorry when things don't go right, but try not to gloss over it, because for the person raising the issue of disability, it may be a really serious concern for them they're raising, that they've thought about a long time before raising, and you being respectful and saying words to the effect of, oh, how does that make you feel? I'm really sorry, I wasn't aware of that, goes a long way to creating a bridge and a trust to enable a good conversation. But what we do know is historically, And we also know from international data that people with disability and their friends and families are wonderful customers. In England, the purple pound has been estimated, which is people with disability and their friends and families as customers, at £274 billion per year. That's a lot of business. And one of the reasons is when people with disability find a habit often that they like to go and do, they'll often repeat it because it just makes life that little bit easier. And as employees, what we know is that people with disability are often incredibly hardworking, loyal, and want to do a good job because they value that they've been given a job. And that valuing people with disability as employees often has an effect on other employees. Because when they see that an organisation, no matter what its size, takes into consideration or enables people to work on the basis of their true selves, often there's an alignment in values. And that alignment in values creates a long-term loyalty, which people want to be attached to that organisation as an employee or a customer, because often what they think is that organisation has an authentic interest in the people that it deals with. So before I talked about the Australian Human Rights Commission's Inclusivity project, this is a project run out of the Disability Rights team, of which there's a website, inclusivity.gov.au. There's some video clips with my unfortunate face on where I talk about some aspects of the employment of people with disability, and there's a number of fact sheets. One of the members, we've just got some representative members from different industries in Australia. One of those is the City of Sydney, which come along to a few meetings just to give us the local government perspective. But what we try and do within the program is to produce as much free content as possible to assist employers to employ people with disability better and to work with the network members to really focus on the question of how you employ people with disability better. So if you go to the website, www.inclusivity.gov.au, there's a lot of great information there for both employers, but also employees with disability. So when we talk about the employment of people with disability though, and disability employment, it is important to be really open that at the moment in Australia, it's an area of grave concern. I know that everyone's looking for employees. We've got a severe worker shortage, we've got incredibly low figures of unemployment, but the figures relating to the employment of people with disability have not changed for 2 decades. One of those is that there's a lack of information as to how to employ people with disability, which we're trying to address. There's a lack of understanding of what disability means in the workplace. And there are some community expectation issues in terms of how people with disability are employed and what job is a good job. And one of the things I often try and say to employers is, they'll say, I don't have a role for a person with a disability. And my comment to them is why is that? And it might be like, well, I don't have a vacant role. But sometimes if you do have a vacancy, it may be about getting a different employee to do that job and a person with disability to do a different job in your organisation. So your organisation then has the appropriate resources to do what it needs, but you've thought a little bit laterally about ensuring that the person with disability is included. A very real reason that you perhaps need to be cognizant of why people with disability can sometimes struggle in employment in terms of getting that initial job or that initial start is covered by a policy called Australia's Disability Strategy. And what Australia's Disability Strategy does is it looks at the different roles and responsibilities of Commonwealth, state, territory and local government for people with disability. And the reason why I raise it today is that one of the concerns for people with disability often is public transport. And when we've talked to people with disability about why they may not have applied for a job or why they felt nervous about applying for a job, one of the concerns that sometimes raised is it's really difficult for me to get to work by 9 a.m. because the public transport near where I live is not great. But if the job started at 10 a.m, I'd be able to take the role. However, I'm too embarrassed to have to say that in a job interview because I don't want to reveal how difficult it is for me to catch public transport. And so where an employer can really add value in this is if you understand that people with disabilities' lives can be impacted upon by a number of factors outside the workplace. You can sometimes say to a person, for example, how can we help make this role easier for you? And the person might say, well, it's actually hard for me to get to work at 9 o'clock. You say, well, that's fine. It really is fine for us if you start at 10. So it is important within that you realise that there are a lot of ongoing issues for people with disability to deal with in Australia. But the good thing about employment and having people with disability as customers is it starts to ensure that as a society, we start to treat people with disability as equals. So what I thought I might just sort of finish upon is balancing up some issues with customer inclusivity and staff inclusivity and some of the things you might consider. Now, what I've got there is often they're the same. Can the person get in to your actual business? The premises standards will often cover this. The Disability Discrimination Act is relevant. But when you consider the built environment, it's really important you don't just consider people who use mobility aids like wheelchairs. You also consider issues such as tactile ground indicators, railing, people who are deaf, people who are low vision, people who are neurodiverse, the lighting that they might need. When a person with disability works in your organisation, if they have an intellectual or cognitive disability or they're low vision, sometimes ICT systems are very difficult for them to use. Printing documents for them or arranging for documents to be provided in a certain format, such as a PDF, is important. And as customers, that ability to click onto your website is something that is, again, very, very important. For customer inclusivity, one of the things you should always try and ask yourself is, can we try and make our goods and services as universally accessible as possible? To do so in terms of services, you should try and train your staff in disability awareness so that they can have interactions where they feel comfortable. And you might consider inclusive advertising campaigns, whether it be targeted at people with disability or people with disability in those campaigns. In terms of staff inclusivity, what you need to look at is what policies you might have relating to recruitment and promotion of people with disability. And for a smaller organisation, one of the things that I would suggest to you is you don't need to have extensive arrays of huge policies in the area that take up pages and pages of documents. But what you do need to do is to take the time to work out what you're going to do when a person with disability applies to your organisation, that you are ready and aware to take into account such things as reasonable adjustments, and you know where to seek information to do so. The Inclusivity website has some information in relation to this, but you may consider also the Job Access website and things of that nature, because the federal government is trying to make a system where it doesn't cost people to employ people with disability as an equal to others. When a person with disability applies for the job, what we do know from statistics is they're often fantastic employees, they're super hardworking and they're super loyal. Try to focus on just what they can do. That is the inherent requirements of the job they can do, not the fact that 1% of the job they can't do and someone else could do on their behalf. So I might leave it there and open up for questions, but thanks for giving me the time to present. And I look forward to hopefully getting out to your neck of the woods sometime soon.
Thank you so much, Ben. So much information there. I know I have a stack of questions. Leanne, how are we going with the audience? Are they coming in, or are we're still mulling over the information?
Not yet, not yet. I'm just going to point out, if everyone can go to the Q&A. I know that it's a great opportunity right now for anybody to ask Ben a question if you have one, and I know he's more than happy to actually help. But Amanda, I know you have a number of questions that we wanted to know.
Yeah, look, I've got quite a few. So I want to tap into, you talked about implications for business owners, and a lot of our audience are small business owners. You mentioned public transport, which was a really fantastic example, and reasonable adjustments. But can you give us some other tangible examples of where business owners might need to turn, their attention to thinking about inclusivity for customers or staff?
For staff, the most common form of reasonable adjustment is just flexible working hours. So, for example, a person with an episodic disability or who may need to go to the hospital each morning, it's very helpful for them to have a little bit of flexibility in terms of when they come in. And that's often not considered, is just that flexibility can create a really great employment opportunity for a long time period for them. Other issues are often how instructions are given. So for a person, it might be easiest if you print out their instructions in a particularly large format so that they can see it and access instructions in that way. Or it might be to slightly change their work environment to make it that little bit easier for them to access. In terms of customers or accessing businesses, what's often relayed when there are disputes concerning disability is a need to communicate upfront that you will provide the person with the assistance that they need. And by that, what I mean is you may have a menu that's slightly bigger that you can give someone who needs bigger text. You might have an entry into your establishment that's slightly different, but you know where it is at all times. You make a point of ensuring that your accessible toilet doesn't have cleaning equipment all through it. So when a person goes to use it, that it's actually accessible. Your staff know where the bathrooms near your where your organisation is based are. So when a customer says, could I access the bathroom facilities? Your staff know to say, oh, it's round the corner, 50 metres down the road, please access, and you know it will be open. And you check on issues such as when a person asks, you have information on your website that when a person does have some form of disability, they can ask and have the conversation with you up front, rather than just assuming that when they come in, everything will be perfect. Because the person with disability might be willing to come in early, have a look, see that it's okay, and then the next day they come along. And that's, I think, that communication, that respectful dialogue is a great way of creating an inclusive culture. And then I think what then happens with inclusive cultures in terms of customers is word will get out is that you're a business that's good at what you do. And look, I've also had situations where businesses say, look, this is the best we can do. It's an older building. It's very challenging for us to maintain. We could try our best, but this is the limit. And I think that honesty in conversation is valued. And so it's about being respectful, kind, and open, and acknowledging disability as an issue is a really good first step.
We have a few questions right now, Ben, and thank you for that advice that you were giving there. A lot of the examples that I suppose you were giving as well were physical, like you can potentially maybe see a disability. We do have a question here of what are some examples of disability that we may not be aware of?
So people who are neurodiverse is a really good example. People who are, sorry, I'm just trying to bring your screen down. People who are neurodiverse, intellectual and cognitive disability is another example of an invisible disability. Epilepsy, certain physiological issues such as Crohn's disease and other types of physiological concerns, chronic pain, sensory disabilities such as hearing loss cannot always be picked up. And those invisible disabilities, it's why it's important to refresh your staff as to their interactions with people with disability, and to do so in a manner where the staff feel comfortable both knowing that these types of circumstances exist, but also have a strategy for how to deal with it. So if a person obviously has some challenges using their hands, my hands, I don't have any active hand function whatsoever. It's very hard for me to grab any type of coin, note, or otherwise. So it's very easy for me to just tap a card. But if I drop the card, then someone in a sense has to drop it for me. Now, the best way for that to occur is for the staff to really just say, oh, I noticed you dropped the card. Would it help you if I grabbed it for you? Now, if I want to grab it myself, I can, but it's a really nice way of making me feel comfortable that they can assist me, and there's an organisation that very much just value those interactions with people with disability.
Thank you. We've got another question. Is there a go-to employment portal for disabled persons looking for work, somewhere a business could actually advertise for roles?
That is on the government's pipeline. I think I'm reasonably friendly with Dylan Alcott, and he's, I think, persuaded the government that they're going to do something like that. But I think what I'd encourage you to do is, when you create an advertisement, is when you consider sort of what to put on the advertisement, it's great if you just put in an open publication and say, we encourage people with disability to apply. If you require any form of reasonable adjustment to any aspect of the interview or selection process, please let us know and we'll try to assist. And that simple language, I think you'll find, will make people feel very, very comfortable, and you'll hopefully get some great applicants. There are also in your area often disability employment services who are looking to place people. You can go that way as well, and there might be some disabled persons organisations who have job boards or things of that nature.
Right, great tip to actually add the line in on your advertisement, I think, to feel that people are encouraged to actually apply. Another question, how do we ensure that prospective employers do not discriminate when they ask about a disability on a pre-interview form? How much do you disclose before the interview to get the interview, or during the interview, or do you wait until you have the job? And what action can you take if you know you didn't get an interview because you disclosed prior to securing an interview? So there was a number of questions there, sure. I know, Ben, but it was all in relation, of course, to getting a job.
So we've got a fact sheet on the Inclusivity website which looks at I like to use the term identification as a person with disability. The reason why I like to use the term, and I do often conflate the term, is disclosure connotes you've got something to sort of hide, like a criminal record. I don't think disability is like that at all. I think you've got to feel comfortable identifying it to the person. But in terms of the need to identify disability, is if you require a reasonable adjustment, you may need to identify an aspect or all of your disability to obtain that reasonable adjustment. It is a deeply personal issue for a person with disability to do that. I have a visible disability, so in a sense, it's pretty obvious once you meet me that I have a disability, but as was articulated, over 80% of the population have invisible disabilities. I think it depends on a person's confidence level as to when they and if they disclose. I am sympathetic to the view that you meet the organisation, you see if the organisation is one that you would like to work for, and then you may try and have the discussion in relation to disability. But I also think that sometimes you've got to trust that the people you're dealing with will be fair-minded in what they're going to do. And you might do some research to see if they have a disability action plan, or if they have some information on their website relating to disability, or you know if a person with disability works there. A good example would be someone asked my sister whether she knew something about disability when she was in the process of hiring something, and she was like, oh, just a little bit. And while she that's probably the correct answer, is just a little bit, she would be incredibly fair-minded. And given the widespread nature of disability in the community, you often find that a person, particularly once they're of working age, may have a friend, a sibling, a colleague, a child of a friend with disability, and they do approach it with an open-minded attitude. And so I would hope that there is not discrimination. If you feel there is discrimination, you can make a complaint to either the Australian Human Rights Commission or the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Board. But you can also ask for feedback as to why you may or may not have been given an interview. What I would hope is, in the present world that we live in, where people are trying to get good employees to work for them, that to the fullest extent possible, employers are proactive in trying to just look for the best candidate. But being comfortable in yourself as to how to approach the issue is something that I think takes a little bit of time to reflect upon. The fact sheet on the Australian Human Rights Commission's Inclusivity website will hopefully assist. There's also a bit of a YouTube clip that goes with it. But again, I think it is one of those issues that if you do some homework up front as to what type of organisation you're applying to, that will hopefully inform how the discussion takes place.
Thank you. Last question from the audience so far is, has legislation been created to ensure that government organisations have a percentage of employees with disabilities?
Legislation has not been created to say that government organisations must have a percentage of employees. What has been created are targets and strategies or policies which are measuring those targets. So it is not, in a sense, a hard quota, but in a sense, soft target to obtaining a certain outcome. If you look internationally as to the use of quotas or the like, there is a variance in terms of whether hard quotas are created for government bodies and for business or large business. It's a matter of debate that can take up the best part of an afternoon as to whether hard quotas do or do not work. But the present approach is to have targets. What I do very much favour, though, is the collection of data and measurement across the whole employment system of the roles people with disability are getting. Because I think if you don't measure it, you don't know whether a policy is good or not.
Is there an organisation then that you would say has done that really well in terms of measurement, Ben, or a company that you've come across and you've gone, yeah, this is great. We've seen a target that's been set in place, and then over time, they've really improved and it's been tangible?
I don't want to play favourites, for want of a better expression. Amongst the includability members, there's some really good examples of policies that have taken place. I think also, if you look at some of the public service policies that exist, such as the Australian Public Services Disability Employment Plan, they have a maturity in terms of collecting data and reporting on it, which is very good. And so the public services are probably at the front. One of the things that is very challenging for Australian businesses of all size is there's no uniform definition of disability, and you don't actually have to disclose you have a disability for a legal reason, except to obtain reasonable adjustment or other such type of adjustments. So I do think the discussion of data is a complicated one, where you can learn a lot from perhaps the public service. But what I would say is that just because it's a difficult issue doesn't mean you should not have a real focus on constantly reviewing your disability employment practices to make sure they're world's best practice. So I often say you need the 3 L's in disability employment. You need leadership from the highest levels of your organisation. You need a long-term focus, and you need to have a learning mentality where you learn from what's occurred and try and improve on it.
Thank you. Amanda, back to you for questions.
Okay. I'd like to ask you about design. And you mentioned in your slides, good design. What is inclusive design? And again, looking at it from the perspective of businesses, and you know, the smaller businesses, I suppose, that probably do have older buildings and challenges relating to those changes.
When you talk about good design, it means everyone can use the good or service. Now, often in the built environment, particularly when there's heritage concerns or issues of past buildings, that is a challenge. But when you talk about the service you offer or things of that nature, the distance you have between tables is not something that you can change. The height of the counter upon which you serve people is something you can have changed. The where you have your prices listed in terms of issues and your ability to get people's attention are things you can change. So when we talk about good design, it's not just good design in terms of the built environment, it's good design of the services that go with it. And so I think that's what we try and emphasise when we talk about universal design, that each person can come in and without adaptation use the good or service.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think it can be quite a blind point, isn't it? When you talk about design, you're just thinking about tangible structures, but the way the customer experience, the usability and inclusiveness really need to cross over. Thank you for those really specific examples. I've taken those down. I'll definitely make a note of those because they're very useful for our businesses. Now, looking at this universal design principles, and you know, we have a lot of local governments and organisations that work a lot with accessibility, and you know, you need to have a lot of collaboration. You need a lot of coordination with different parties. Often they need to think outside their scope. And when you're looking at like our local governments, our councils, how do you think they can make the most impact, or what are the biggest areas that they can concentrate on to have impact given tight budgets and, you know, limitations?
I think there's an aspect of sort of what they can do in this area is first of all to try and set up some processes that enable them to point out that when they build anything new, it's above reproach. Because the cheapest way to make sure you have accessibility is to build it in up front. So the universal design principles are it's equitable in use, flexible in use, simple and intuitive to use, there's perceptible information, there's a tolerance for error, there's low physical effort, and there's appropriate size and space for approach and use. And they're sort of taken from some University of North Carolina principles that are sort of proliferated around. I think it is helpful if councils all try and establish some form of accessibility working group for each council. And within that, they then ask the members of council what they think would be the best thing for them to work on and give them the information to make that decision. And try and involve local people with disability as part of that, because they will give you that sort of on-the-ground feedback that's really important. And I think then within that, another issue that should arise is, to what extent will this impact on a person with disability doing something that's very much important for them to do, whether to be part of the community, etc. And if there are no workarounds, then I think you would focus on that need basis initially. But I do think that one of the challenges in this area is often councils sort of say, where should I start? And I think the answer to that is start by getting your processes in place, including having relevant accessibility action group or something within your council, and let them assist you to make the choices which are best for your organisation, but also best for that area.
We have a question, Ben. It's a little bit broader, but it says, what are the changes that you would like to see in government and in business which will lead to more inclusion and improve employability for people with disabilities? So what are the top big changes you would like to see? And that could be, as an example, improvements to legislation, and what would that be? Or maybe not. What are your top two, maybe, big changes you'd like to see?
I think we do need to amend the Disability Discrimination Act to make it of greater assistance to people with disability now and in the future, and that takes into consideration that it is very challenging for a person with disability to presently bring a claim through the Australian Human Rights Commission and to the federal court. And for that to occur, we need to change how the Act operates. The second issue that I think needs to be changed is we need to have a far easier system for employers to get access to advice, equipment and assistance to seek to employ people with disability. And that when people with disability are given those roles, that if it doesn't work out, that the person with disability does not lose all of their entitlements because they've tried to go off and get a job. And we try to be really helpful in terms of, if you're going to put yourself in a position to get a career, build a job, all these things, that we look after that individual if it doesn't work out. And that way businesses can make decisions as to who is the best employee for them. And there will not be this sort of immense level of stress when it doesn't work out as hoped. I think it's also really important, though, to note that it's not just about recruitment. We need people with disability to be retained and promoted in organisations into leadership roles. And often they are very good in leadership roles because throughout their lives they've had to communicate a lot, and they become very good at communicating as to sort of what's needed as a result of their life circumstances. And they understand the diversity in the populations in which they live or have lived. And so they have an innate understanding of some of the customer base that they're dealing with.
We have another question. Where can a small business go to find an employee with a disability? I know you mentioned, often there's like local businesses, but do you know of anywhere where you can actually direct people to, and what additional supports can be provided to them to help with training and upskilling? I know you partially answered this in a previous question, but yeah, for small business.
So usually there'll be disability employment services that operate in particular areas. They will have people who they're trying to place into jobs. They will be able to provide some assistance in terms of training and upskilling as part of that. There's also some federal government programs such as job support, job access, which can then, I think, assist people with disability. There's some information available on the Inclusivity website relating to this, but also on the federal government websites relating to training. What often is good is if you find a DES provider or a provider of assistance who's good, tell other people you've had a good experience with them, because we want to reward good conduct or good behaviour or good outcomes and make sure that we have people with disability getting good jobs.
Thanks. Final thing, which this attendee has almost answered her own question, and she thinks it's the Inclusivity site, but just to confirm it with you, she says she has a few friends who have work injuries, which led to inabilities and struggle to reinstate back into work. They need to remain open about their injury and recovery and wish to build a career, but realise they cannot continue with the jobs they were in. What's a good support organisation that can help them configure their knowledge and skills towards a workable career? Would you point these people to your Inclusivity website for tip sheets, or is there any other support organisation that would help people adjust?
We would point people to our website. We've got more resources coming, so we're going to be constantly updating that website. One of our pilots is actually going to consider people who have injured going back to work. So we're trying to work on a way to tell the story of how that occurs in a way that's better. It is at the moment a very challenging area for both the person with disability and the employer. And I say that with a little bit of a caveat, because I think employers should be really open to employing people with disability, particularly when they've recently acquired a disability, whether at work or not. But what can be a challenge is that sort of those initial steps of getting back to work. And we want to make that area a bit more simplified. And at present, it's complicated. And for that reason, we're hopeful of doing a pilot where we talk about how it's done and others can learn from that and then use it in a way to get more people into great roles.
Great. Back to you, Amanda. You're on mute, Amanda.
Yes, I got the big sign saying you are mute. So I wanted to ask, probably a little bit touching on what you've already spoken about, but missed business opportunities. And what are some of those simple or maybe not so simple ways that businesses would be able to adjust and attract more customers?
So in England, it's estimated at £274 billion. That's quite a lot of business, even if you take into account population. I think the ways that you can adapt and adjust are be open that you're wanting people with disabilities as as customers. To be clear that if someone comes into your organisation or establishment to access something, that you are willing to adjust. It takes nothing to have a sign on a table at a cafe to say, please reserve this table for people who may need it or who have mobility concerns and may need the table. We value all customers. We value people, accessible customers. It's about tailoring your advertising to people who might be slightly older, and then realising that they also have a lot of income to spend on certain issues, and to then saying to people, well, our accessible entrance is by the side. We have 3 tables set aside for people with accessibility, having on the bottom of a menu or the bottom of a sign, if there's a way we can help you that we haven't thought of, please ring or ask up front. Some of those little just acknowledgements are a wonderful way of starting a dialogue. And then that dialogue can lead to a lot of, one, loyalty from that person, but there's every likelihood that that person will tell a lot of people as well, and that goodwill will build up. And that's a way of, I guess, ensuring that people are interested. And it takes nothing, and it is just good customer service sometimes to just ask a person, is there any way I could make it easier for you to access what you need? And the person may then say, I'm really sorry, I can't, could you please read the menu to me, or something like that. And that takes absolutely nothing to do, but the outcome for that individual who's received that good service may be profound and lead to not only a better business, but also, I think, a society that we all want to be a part of.
Thank you for that advice. Yeah, it's a very simple change, isn't it? To be open and welcoming to all, and very inclusive in the language and staff training.
We have just one final question, Amanda, probably from the audience.
One? Okay.
Yeah, just one last one, and then maybe we'll just have one question, we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
But the last one is, if a staff member acquires a disability that makes it difficult to get to their job, that is a person who can no longer catch public transport due to limited mobility, but could continue the job if they had a car spot, is there anything in the Disability Discrimination Act that could enforce an employer to adjust employment conditions for situations like this?
It is a little bit important I don't delve into the area of giving advice, just because a complaint can come into the Australian Human Rights Commission. But what I will say is that if a person has a disability and there is a reasonable adjustment that could be made to enable them to work, then what is a reasonable adjustment is assessed by what's termed of an unjustifiable hardship. And what a court would look at would be the size of the organisation, the nature of the adjustment, and the extent to which the adjustment relates to the inherent requirements of their role. Now, if an organisation has 250 car parks and they are asked to give one car park, that's quite different to an organisation that doesn't have any car parks and is being asked to acquire a car park. So there are a lot of factual permeations that go into that question. But what I would hope is that try and have an upfront and fair-minded discussion with your employer. It may be that you work from home 1 or 2 days if possible, or that you catch a taxi in or an Uber 1 or 2 days. When I talked to a large Australian bank once about disability employment, one of them told me a story that a person with disability had worked for them was becoming a little bit less reliable in terms of absenteeism. And what that organisation said to me is they were just horrified that they found out the person was basically travelling for 1 kilometre or 2 to get to a public transport stop, and was so covered in rain by the end of the day that they just didn't want to be wet all day before they got public transport. And so they just said, well, we'll just pay for your Uber. And so sometimes organisations of size and scale may be willing to do that. That's not always realistic. But it is important to have the discussion about why it might be of concern, because what might be realistic is that organisation could say, if it's pouring with rain or if it's a really different type of day, why don't you just work at home? And other days you come into the office. So there are often workarounds, but the important issue is good, fair-minded and open communication.
I see one last question has snuck in. Do you want to ask that one, Leanne?
Sure, sorry, I'm muting myself. Said, my daughter has a job where there is no public transport, so we have to drop her off and pick her up every day. what other options are there? Uber is too expensive, and are there any other subsidies available to help us? And I know this is very specific, Ben.
Yeah, in relation to that issue, I think it is probably important to first of all see if there are any other supports that could exist through the disability employment system. So if you've got a DES provider, they may have knowledge of that support. If you've got an NDIS package, it might be asking for different additional aspects of that package to be provided. In relation to your employer, it may be asking for different times of employment, etc. I appreciate in Sydney traffic, etc., is an incredible concern and very, very challenging. The job access supports and things of that nature can be put into existence in certain circumstances. And so it is probably a matter of taking consideration of that website and some of the government websites that exist in relation to that, some of the resources that are available on the Inclusivity website, and then hopefully an amicable solution can be reached to enable people to remain employed. I do know that, at least for NDIS participants, there is an incredible emphasis on ensuring that particularly young people are employed. And whilst not everyone is an NDIS participant, it's actually only 10 to 15% of people with disability. If the person is an NDIS participant, it is possible to often get some employment support to enable them to get to and from work.
Thank you so much, Ben. We've run out of time, and I will just thank you so much for making the time to give us so much insight into this topic. I feel like we've just scratched the surface. What we are going to do is send an email out to all of our registered attendees with a recording so that you can watch it again, as well as a whole lot of links and information. We will get from Ben all of those links and websites that he mentioned and we might have missed, as well as highlighting a couple of our own BBP member businesses that you might want to have a closer look at in relation to this important area. So with that, I will close off this session and I look forward to seeing our audience at our next webinar, which details will be coming out shortly in relation to introduction to net zero for businesses. Thank you so much.